It was the dawn of a new century, a time when the world believed anything was possible. The year was 1912. Automobiles were still a novelty. Electricity was lighting up cities, and engineers dreamed of conquering nature itself. And there she was, the RMS Titanic. The largest, most luxurious ship ever built. Nearly 900 feet of steel, taller than any building in Southampton, gleaming in the April sun. They called her the Ship of Dreams, and whispered that she was unsinkable. Crowds lined the docks that morning, waving handkerchiefs, shouting farewells. Steam hissed from her funnels. The air was thick with excitement, the smell of salt, and the deep rumble of her engines. On the upper decks, wealthy passengers strolled in tailored suits and elegant gowns. In first class, men like John Jacob Astor and Benjamin Guggenheim sipped champagne under crystal chandeliers. They spoke of business deals, European holidays, and the American spring awaiting them in New York. A few decks below, second-class passengers, teachers, merchants, small-town families explored their comfortable cabins. For them, Titanic was a taste of luxury they had never known. And far down in the third-class quarters, hundreds of immigrants clutched their tickets like lifelines. Young couples holding hands, parents calming restless children, and single men with everything they owned packed in small suitcases. For them, this voyage wasn't just a trip. It was hope. Hope for work, for freedom, for a new beginning across the ocean. As noon approached, Captain Edward Smith, a tall man with a white beard and the quiet confidence of decades at sea, stood on the bridge. This would be his final voyage before retirement, and he intended to make it flawless. With a signal from the dock, the ropes were cast off. Slowly, the Titanic pulled away from the pier, her whistle sounding deep and proud. But even in that triumphant moment, there was a strange incident. As the Titanic passed another ship, the SS New York, the sheer pull of her massive hull caused the smaller vessel's ropes to snap. The New York drifted dangerously close, nearly colliding before tugboats pushed her back. Laughter and cheers erupted on deck. No harm done, yet for some it felt like an omen. By late afternoon, the ship was steaming steadily down the English Channel, her bow cutting cleanly through the waves. Passengers explored her grand staircase, her Turkish baths, the smoking lounges, and the promenade deck that seemed to stretch forever. That evening, as the sun dipped into the horizon, the lights of the Titanic glowed warm against the darkening sky. In the dining saloons, music floated over clinking glasses and quiet laughter. On deck, couples leaned on the railings, watching the stars blink to life above the calm sea. No one knew that far to the northwest, in the icy waters of the North Atlantic, an iceberg drifted silently, a giant of frozen time waiting in the shadows. The newspapers had called the Titanic a triumph of modern engineering, a ship that could sail through any storm, withstand any blow. But the ocean has its own rules. And in just 4 nights, the pride of man would meet the power of nature, and nothing would ever be the same again. For 4 days, the Titanic sailed as if charmed. The sea lay flat as a mirror, the engines hummed like a heartbeat, and laughter drifted across the decks. Children played with hoops, ladies in wide hats posed for photographs, and men in tailored suits smoked cigars against the crisp Atlantic breeze. Wireless messages from other ships, ice ahead, large bergs, began arriving by the dozen. One came from the Mesaba, heavy pack ice and field ice ahead, latitude 42nd. Another, from the Californian, described an entire field of ice blocking their course. Yet many of these warnings never reached the bridge. The 2 Marconi operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, were swamped with personal telegrams from wealthy passengers, some demanding instant delivery. One urgent iceberg warning was met with, "Shut up, I'm working Cape Race." By the evening of April 14th, the air had turned sharp and cold. Deck chairs went empty. Experienced sailors noted something eerie. The sea had gone utterly still. No wind, no waves, just black water and a blacker sky. Without a moon, the horizon dissolved into darkness. It was the kind of night when icebergs could hide until they were close enough to touch. At 11:39 p.m. in the Crow's Nest, Lookout Frederick Fleet stamped his feet to keep warm. He later recalled, "It was so dark I couldn't see the horizon. Then I saw it, a shadow, taller than the deck." He rang the bell 3 times and shouted into the voice pipe, "Iceberg, right ahead." On the bridge, First Officer William Murdoch reacted instantly. Hard to starboard, engines reversed. The Titanic began her slow turn. But she was too close. It's too fast. 22 knots. And the iceberg's submerged mass was far larger than the jagged tip they could see. The collision was not the explosive crash many imagined. Survivors described it as a long, sickening scrape, like a giant knife slicing through the hole. In the smoking lounge, men glanced up from their cards. One passenger later said it felt like the ship shivered, kept going. But deep below, in the mailroom, sacks of letters floated in icy water. In the boiler rooms, firemen heard the roar as seawater poured in. The iceberg had ripped open over 300 feet of hull plating, flooding 6 watertight compartments. The Titanic could survive 4, but not 6. On paper, the disaster's seeds had been sown in seconds. In reality, death was coming in slow motion. And among those now unknowingly sentenced were some of the most famous names of the age. John Jacob Astor, for one of the richest men in the world. Isidor Straus, co-owner of Macy's department store. Benjamin Guggenheim, the mining magnate. They dined. They laughed. Unaware the ocean had already claimed them. Above deck, the ship steamed on for a few minutes more. Stars glittered overhead. Most passengers felt nothing was wrong. But in the bridge and boiler rooms, men exchanged silent glances they knew. The Unsinkable had been mortally wounded. And somewhere out in the black water, the iceberg drifted away, vanishing into the night. Just after midnight, the Titanic's grand corridors echoed with a sound no one expected. A steady, unnatural vibration beneath the carpets, followed by muffled orders from the crew. Stewards knocked on doors, their voices calm but urgent. "Please put on your life jackets. Come to the boat deck." In first class, some laughed it off. An accident? Impossible, one gentleman scoffed, fastening his silk robe. Others, curious, stepped out onto the deck and found the night air biting cold, their breath hanging like smoke. Down in second class, teacher Lawrence Beasley later recalled, "I opened my porthole and saw small chunks of ice floating past. The deck was strangely tilted, just enough to make you feel off balance." In third class, confusion turned to panic. Families tried to climb narrow stairwells, only to find locked gates. Many didn't speak English well enough to understand the orders. One Irish immigrant later said, "We could hear music, laughter, and thought. How could it be dangerous if the band was still playing?" Captain Smith ordered lifeboats uncovered. The crew hesitated. They had never drilled a full evacuation before. The first boat, lowered at 12:40 a.m., carried just 28 people, though it could hold 65. Passengers refused to leave the apparent safety of the Titanic. For a small wooden craft swaying over black water, the contrast on deck was surreal. In one corner, Benjamin Guggenheim, dressed in his finest evening wear, told a steward, "We are dressed in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen." Nearby, Isidor and Ida Straus stood together. Ida refused to board a boat without her husband, saying simply, "Where you go, I go." They would both perish. By 1 a.m., the bow was noticeably lower. The sea lapped at the deck level of the well deck. Some passengers slipped as the angle increased. The ship's great whistle bellowed through the night, a haunting call that carried for miles. The band, led by Wallace Hartley, switched from waltzes to hymns. Survivors would swear they heard nearer, "My God, to thee," as the cold grew sharper. In the water, the temperature was 28 degrees Fahrenheit, enough to stop a human heart in minutes. But many still refused to leave, believing rescue ships were close. The truth was far worse. The nearest ship, the Californian, sat just 10 miles away. But its wireless operator had gone to bed, missing Titanic's distress calls. Above the music and wind, faint cracks and groans began to echo from deep inside the ship's steel frame. The Unsinkable was breaking under her own weight. By 2 a.m., the Titanic's angle was terrifying. Passengers clung to railings, some crawling on hands and knees to keep from sliding. A few, gripped by desperation, jumped into the black water. their screams cut short by the freezing cold. In the lifeboats, survivors watched in disbelief. Seaman George Simmons later said, "It was like watching a great building collapse in slow motion. The stern rose higher, the propellers clear of the water, glinting under the stars. Then came a deep, splitting roar. The ship's steel spine gave way between the third and fourth funnels. The bow, already flooded, plunged to the bottom in a cloud of bubbles and debris. The stern settled back for a moment, almost level. Then began its own death climb. People ran uphill toward the very tip, crowding together, holding hands, praying. Father Thomas Biles, a Catholic priest, moved among them, giving absolution. At 2:17 a.m., the last lifeboat pulled away. Hundreds still remained on deck. The lights flickered, then went out for good. In the starlight, the stern hung almost vertical before sliding into the sea, with a roar that some said sounded like the end of the world. In the freezing water, chaos turned quickly to silence. Within 15 minutes, most voices were gone. Out of over 1,500 people thrown into the Atlantic, only a handful would survive the night. Among the dead were some of the era's most famous names: Astor, Guggenheim, Straus, the millionaire George Widener. Their wealth had meant nothing against the cold grip of the ocean. Above the dark water, bits of wreckage floated, deck chairs, pieces of wood, a child's doll. The lifeboats sat nearby, their occupants too afraid to row back for fear of being swamped. Fifth Officer Harold Lowe eventually returned in Boat 14, but found only bodies. One survivor, Eva Hart, who was 7 at the time, remembered. The cries were terrible, like a chorus. And then, all at once, it stopped. The sea that night was calm, the stars brilliant. And yet, beneath that perfect sky, the greatest ship ever built lay broken in two, sinking into the abyss. At first light, the survivors saw her, the RMS Carpathia, steaming toward them through a field of ice. Captain Arthur Rostron had pushed his ship at full speed through the dangerous night, dodging bergs to reach them. One by one, the lifeboats were pulled alongside. Frozen hands reached upward, lifting children, wrapping shivering women in blankets. Some were silent, others sobbed openly. In total, just 706 people survived. Over 1,500 were lost, making it one of the deadliest peacetime maritime disasters in history. Entire families were wiped out. In some cases, only a single member of a household lived to tell the tale. News of the disaster swept the world within hours. Newspapers from New York to London carried bold headlines: "Titanic sinks, hundreds dead." Crowds gathered outside White Star Line offices, scanning lists for familiar names. In the weeks that followed, British and American inquiries exposed the chain of failures. Too few lifeboats. Ignored iceberg warnings, excessive speed in dangerous waters. Laws changed, lifeboats for all, 24-hour radio watch, ice patrols. But the loss of Titanic left more than rules in its wake. It left a story, part cautionary tale, part legend. Survivors carried the memories for the rest of their lives. Some never sailed again. Others gave countless interviews, their voices trembling even decades later. In 1985, explorers Robert Ballard and Jean-Louis Michel found the wreck, 2 miles beneath the Atlantic. Her bow lay buried in silt, her stern twisted and broken. China plates still sat on shelves, shoes lay in the mud, and chandeliers swayed gently in the deep-sea currents. Today, Titanic is more than a shipwreck. She is a reminder of human ambition and human frailty. A warning carved in steel and ice, that no matter how advanced we become, nature still holds the final word. And somewhere in that cold darkness, the ship of dreams sleeps, but her story will never sink.